I'd like to welcome everyone as well to this webinar. Hopefully, we're going to give you some interesting insights into what we believe is happening in the CXM market. We're going to look at the outsourcing market trends and have a look at some of the adoption trends that we're seeing. We're also going to touch on the state of digital CXM, and we'll go into more detail about exactly what that is. But rest assured, it will touch on generative AI, which is a topic that I know everyone is asking questions about, and it feels almost like it's the law that we have to mention generative AI, but it is a hot topic in CXM, so we are definitely going to cover that. And then we'll provide a little bit more detail about our recent release of our CXM Peak Matrix assessments, where we cover the global market, and we'll also mention the other regions as well. So hopefully there'll be some insights today. As was said during the introduction, we're happy to take questions. We've always had a number of questions already prior to the session, and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can through the session. But if we don't get to them, please put one in the chat. And again, we'll do our best to answer them during the session live. If not, we'll definitely follow up with them after the session. So I'm just going to start a little bit just to set the scene. So when we talk about customer experience management, we know that it's a significant market, and we see the market of customer experience management being valued at around $350 billion a year of spend. About 69% of that, we believe, is going to be this year, is actually done in-house. So that's obviously not spend with an external outsourcer or a service provider, but are what organizations are spending on providing that service for themselves. But about $113 to $115 billion is spent on outsourced CXM services. And so you can see it is a really healthy market. We've seen it grow significantly since prior to the pandemic. We saw a big increase during the pandemic because of the need for additional services, people needing to have additional support because of their work model was impacted by COVID. So the good news, if you're a service provider on this call, and we have a good mix of service providers and enterprise buyers, is actually there is a very healthy addressable market to go after. And obviously, if you're an enterprise buyer on this call, you can see that actually the use of outsourcing is continuing to increase because of our valid reasons, especially as people are thinking about digital transformation and how they leverage digital skills and technologies. There is also a focus on how you can leverage outsourced service providers to deliver that as well. So that's the size of the market. So a very healthy market, and you can see why there's a lot of attention on this space. And then when we think about it from a purely an outsourced perspective, as I said earlier, the growth has been pretty healthy. We saw that peak back in 2021. Due to all of the economic uncertainties happening right now, we are expecting that number will flatten a little bit, especially as we're seeing that volumes are being down a little bit in terms of some of the organizations and enterprises in sections where they're being impacted by recessionary winds. Then actually we're seeing volumes declining a little bit, and also a push towards more outsourcing, which we'll cover in the deck as well. Sorry, offshoring, which we'll cover in the deck as well. We've seen a slight decline in revenues, but we'll get into a lot more detail of that as well. But again, a very healthy market in terms of outsourcing spend. And if you're an enterprise buyer, you can see that outsourcing is definitely playing a part in delivering an exceptional customer experience. And Annabelle, why don't you take us into a little bit more detail in terms of what we're seeing in the market?
Absolutely, David. So moving on to the next slide. Now here, we want to talk about some of the, the adoption by regions. So when we look at the, the CXM market, as you rightly mentioned, that 2023 is a year where we do expect some of the recessionary headwinds to, decrease the growth of the market. But talking of the previous year in 2022, we did see a good amount of growth, especially in some of the larger markets. So North America, traditionally, since it is the largest market, it grew further in 2022, particularly driven by first-time outsourcers and mature enterprises as well, which continued to get into large-scale CX transformation projects and adoption of next-gen technologies. However, continental Europe and UK had a slight dip, and this was predominantly due to a lot of these large COVID-related government contracts being cancelled. And this was also compounded by the inflation in Europe and the shadow of multiple regional conflicts that were seen in 2022. We do expect UK to remain flat even in 2023. But for some of the other regions, we did see high growth. Asia Pacific has remained a very high growth market, especially by some of the growing economies in that particular market, such as India, China, Philippines, and is expected to continue that growth trajectory in 2023. In fact, we had one of the questions around, what are some of the key players in the Indian market? So the Indian market predominantly is governed by a lot of these IT BPO players, and we do cover a lot of them in our peak metrics as well. But then we also see some specialized players such as IGT Solutions doing really well in that market, creating a niche for themselves. And then when we look at some of the other regions, Middle East and Africa, although a very small segment, has been showing very high growth. And this is expected to continue growing at a double-digit growth rate, given the region's rapid development in infrastructure and emphasis on CX. However, that being said, the recent ongoings due to the war in Israel and Palestine does have some implications, especially in the Northern African region, countries like Egypt. So that's going to be an area where it's going to be interesting to have a close look in terms of how that pans out. And affects the growth of that region in 2023, the rest of this year, and perhaps more so in the next year as well. And then we also, so before I move on to the next slide, actually, we also had a question around processes. So I wanted to touch on that, which are some of the key processes that are in demand. So we do see a lot of demand in 2022. We saw a lot of demand for value-added services such as customer retention management and loyalty management, especially given the times that we are in. It's absolutely paramount to retain some of your high value customers. So having those sort of services, customer analytics, which helps in anticipating customer needs and taking those data driven decisions and optimizing business strategies, those are services that have really picked up. We also saw a demand for payment collections, driven by banks, NBFCs, as well as other lending enterprises, which wanted to increase their financial health through recoveries and debt collection services. And then apart from that, one of the other things that really grew was the demand for CX consulting, often seen as a starting point for large transformation projects, or even for some of the first-time outsourcers. They do like to get into these CX consulting projects to really understand what are some of the processes or what are some of the systems that they really need to upgrade. So, processes such as CX, customer journey mapping, user experience design, those are again services that really picked up in demand. Then moving on and looking at it from an industry perspective, we did see the technology and fast growth tech segment having a fast growth in 21 to 22. And this was predominantly through segments such as streaming, gaming, and fintech, which had really shown high growth and high adoption of CX outsourcing. However, in 2023, due to the funding winter, we do expect that a lot of these enterprises, because of layoffs and a lot of cost pressures that they're going through, we do expect that segment is going to have a slightly muted growth in 2023. The BFSI sector had robust growth, especially driven by upsurge in mobile banking and the widespread adoption of self-serve solutions. And fintechs and insurtechs are leading the way in terms of investing and transforming their digital CX services, and that is also having a ripple effect on some of the traditional banks in their efforts to stay in touch with the competition, how they're offering and modernizing their CX services. The travel and hospitality segment also experienced a substantial upswing, which was expected, especially given that there was a subdued interest in, especially during the COVID times. But the renewed surge in leisure travel, as well as revival of corporate travel, has definitely contributed to this expansion. We also saw retail sort of grow in line with the market rate, and e-commerce was driving most of this growth. And we did see there was a lot of emphasis on having digital experiences and again self-serve solutions within the retail segment, specifically within e-commerce, having those digital customer journeys and buying journeys, which contributed to the growth of this segment. Government sector, again, we did anticipate that given the pulling out of large contracts, COVID-related contracts, it did have a deceleration, and this trend is anticipated to continue. even in 2023 and 4. And then finally, the healthcare industry also had a robust growth in 2022, and this was predominantly propelled by the emphasis on improving patient experience, and also sort of this has been amplified by intensified competition and regulatory demands, resulting in greater investments to improve the CX. Next, when we look at it from a channel perspective, voice, unsurprisingly, still remains the majority, has the lion's share, close to 75% of the total market, which emphasizes that we still prefer to speak to agents. However, that being said, this is gradually changing with millennials and Gen Z, preferring to get into or preferring to use more non-voice channels. That is leading to a very high growth for some of the digital channels. So here, what we've actually also done is go a level deeper and break down voice and chat into further sub-components. So for voice, we've actually broken it down to agent-driven and IVR-driven. So here, what we are seeing is that we do see a lot of IVR-driven conversations, which is end-to-end driven by IVR, growing at a much faster rate than completely agent-driven conversations. And then on the chat side as well, we have asynchronous and synchronous chat. So we do see asynchronous chat to be growing at a much faster rate because it is much more convenient for customers. And also with the influx of AI-powered chatbots, which are offering more immediate and comprehensive responses, which fit into the omni-channel customer support delivery, we do see chat to be growing much faster in the coming years.
And above, one of the things I think is interesting, and apologies if you've been on these webinars before, I probably said the same thing, but having the benefit of age, being quite old, about 20 years ago or 15 years ago when I was working in this industry, the prediction was that voice would be dead by now. We were expecting voice would be gone, and obviously voice is not gone. And I think that's a really interesting telltale sign that obviously some of the digital solutions like conversational AI haven't necessarily hit the spot from a customer demand perspective, and they are getting better over time. And I think the use of generative AI will also move them forward. But actually, as I say, it was supposed to be down to 0 by now, and you can still see that 74% of revenues is still through voice, and 77% of that 74 is still agent driven. So people do still want to speak to people, and partly that's human nature, but it's also partly because I think the solutions have taken a while to get to where we needed to get to. So just an interesting perspective based on where we thought we'd be 15 years ago to where we actually are today.
Absolutely, David. I think you're spot on that. And I mean, honestly, even I felt that way when, 5 years back, that this technology is going to just break away the way that we speak and do customer support services. But it's still not there yet. And as you rightly mentioned, that speaking to a human being at the end of the day is still the most preferred method, because these technologies do not provide that level of comfort yet and that level of assurance, which ultimately at the end of the day, customer support is supposed to be all about. So, but then having said that, we do see a lot of, with the growing influx of the Gen Z and the millennial population, which prefers work to be done without necessarily the need for speaking to an agent. We do see a lot of these digital channels coming up and growing much faster right now, but it's going to be a long time before we actually get to complete elimination of voice, and I don't think that it's going to be happening anytime soon. Moving on, let's look at again now the adoption of channels, adoption of CXM from a service delivery perspective. Now, this is really interesting because what we saw during the pandemic was completely, or at least a lot of work getting into fully remote delivery models. What you see on the screen is the number for 2021. In 2020, it was even higher, and that just showed how the industry was able to evolve into a fully remote solution, predominantly because that was the only way to get work done at that point. But what's interesting is as the years have passed, as we've evolved out of the pandemic, we've seen it sort of going back. not as much as we had as much of in-center work as we had prior to the pandemic, but somewhere sort of reaching a midway stage where we see a huge or a healthy mix of remote, hybrid, as well as in-center. So in-center has certainly increased in the last 2 years. And this is partly driven by demand from enterprises itself, especially enterprises which are in more clients, which handle more client sensitive data and have more security sensitive issues to deal with, especially like healthcare and banking. And also partly due to the fact that service providers sometimes feel that they have better operational presence in center models. The percentage of remote models or remote agents has experienced a significant decrease. And remote work is often leveraged by service providers as an added incentive for high performing agents. So right now what we are seeing is that remote work has certainly decreased a lot, and we are seeing hybrid as something that is really coming up. It's always been around, but it's really increasing now further, because hybrid delivery models, the main thing that it offers is that it gives enhanced flexibility both to the agents and service providers. And given the importance and emphasis on agent experience, the hybrid delivery models have certainly gone a long way in ensuring that they provide the most optimal agent experience. They give that sort of flexibility to agents in terms of choosing the days that they come to work. So, and within hybrid as well, so we have days where or different sorts of hybrid models. So it could be less than 20%, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, as you can see on this infographic here. The most predominant ones within hybrid are the 40 to 60 and 60 to 80% in center models, which means that roughly they come to office around 3 to 4 times a week. And then there are other models as well, but they're not so predominant.
Annabelle, just one thing to point out on this, I think, which is, so this is a global picture, but if you look at it by country, it can differ. So we're hearing that obviously in the US, for example, a couple of service providers I've spoken to recently, they're almost 100% still fully remote, but in the US, but then their models delivering offshore, whether it's in the Philippines or India, are much more 100% in center. So the numbers end up back like this. But actually, if you're interested in the models and the breakdown, then it can differ depending on the location that you're delivering from as well. So, and we're always happy to try and answer any of those questions that you may get later down the line, but just wanted to call that out.
Yep, absolutely. That's the trend that we are seeing, that service providers which tend to have more agents onshore or maybe even completely onshore, most of them have a lot of fully remote agents. Whereas the service providers which are predominantly based out of India, Philippines, or even Africa have a lot of in-center agents. And that's particularly driven by better operational presence and control over agents as well. And this is the trend that we will see. I think going forward, we will see hybrid to increase further. And in-center and remote would depend on pretty much on where the agents are located. Moving on to the next slide. Now here we want to discuss, what are some of the pricing models that we're seeing. So in 2022, what we saw was that input-based pricing still maintained its dominant share with more than 50% of the market. And it benefited from one of the reasons why input-based pricing we do expect to continue even in 2023 is that it offers a better predictability in terms of the pay for enterprises, and that's something that they prefer, especially given these times that we are in. So input-based model is something which is still remaining a predominant model. However, that being said, hybrid models, especially the ones that are able to mix some element of risk sharing with pure input or a pure output based models, are really gaining traction, because those are models which help enterprises take on some risks, but not fully get committed into a pure outcome based model itself. So not a lot of enterprises are yet ready for pure outcome based enterprises, and we do see some sort of hesitance even from the service provider side to get into pure outcome based models, because they might not be as confident in executing those deals in a margin accretive way. But having said that, some of the larger enterprises and some of the larger service providers as well are looking to get more towards the outcome-based or risk-sharing models, predominantly because those offer much more strategic benefits and are sort of levers to unlock more long-term strategic partnerships between the service providers and the enterprises.
Yeah, and just my last old man comment of being around for a long time, but I think, again, this is one of those examples where 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of focus on how do we get to outcome-based models. And unfortunately, we've not necessarily seen it change, because actually when you try and do a true outcome-based model, it becomes really hard to track down the true outcome. Can a service provider really be held accountable for the end-to-end outcome? As an enterprise buyer, have you impacted the outcome? So when you try and contract for it and legal and finance get involved, it becomes very difficult and it goes into the too hard to do bucket. And that's why people are falling into the hybrid buckets much more often, because it's a middle ground between the two. But definitely there was always an appetite from organizations and a lot of enterprise buyers we speak to who would love to move to outcome. It just becomes difficult to do. But we do expect that to continue to evolve over time, especially as we look to much more sort of digital delivery of services. And then if you could really deliver on the outcome, then actually makes it a much cleaner and a model that you can incentivize both parties to do the right thing from. So definitely see that developing. But right now, as we've said, not really as much movement as was expected in previous years.
Yep, and we do see some correlation in terms of outcome being more preferred in certain processes, which are easier to actually be calculated or estimated. So, for example, services such as sales, lead generation, those sort of processes are more amenable for outcome-based pricing because they tend to have more clear and measurable outcomes, to your point. And so those are processes which tend to have slightly more adoption of these outcome-based pricing models, particularly because it's easier to actually do the pricing for those sort of services, whereas some of the other services might be too complicated to actually get to a pricing which is fairly understood by both parties and have an agreement upon. Then moving on to the next slide. Now, in this slide, we really want to look at some of the key challenges that enterprises have faced. This slide was actually sourced from our enterprise buyer survey, which we did as a part of our peak process, where we interviewed more than 140 enterprise buyers. So the key challenges that we faced, that enterprises told us that we faced, were, one of them was technology deficiencies. A lot of enterprises are still struggling with battling to get out of legacy solutions and systems, and they struggle in terms of choosing the right solutions which can give them the optimal ROI. And there's this constant hustle as well to upgrade their solutions and remain competitive in the market. Language support remains a constant challenge, especially when it comes to languages which are not so common. European languages, for example, particularly has been difficult to get at a competitive price point onshore. Therefore, looking at effective solutions offshore has been a challenge, and multilingual support in that way, especially during peak season, has remained a challenge. FTE related problems around attrition and recruitment of new FTs has subsided a bit since the pandemic, but it still remains one of the challenges, and especially when it comes to speed to proficiency and rising costs on training of agents, that remains one of the challenges for enterprises. And that leads to the point of cost management, given that there is such a huge emphasis on controlling costs in these macroeconomic environments. The high day-to-day operating costs, especially driven by increasing agent salaries, is creating a pressure which service providers are passing on to enterprises, and that's again something which enterprises tell us that it's a problem for them to manage. And business inefficiency also, it's a lack of centralization and identifying the right kind of processes, as I was mentioning, around the need for CX consulting to do these large scale assessments to understand what are the bottlenecks, is again something that enterprises do tend to struggle with. And then moving on to the next slide, I'll just cover this quickly in terms of what are some of the challenges that a lot of lot of different verticals are facing, we do see a lot of specific challenges, especially when you look at, for example, domain expertise being called out as a challenge within BFSI, specifically with very complex processes that are involved within that particular sector. Retail has challenges around maintaining those the staffing, especially for peak hours, and even things like inventory forecasting and those sort of things. Technology has issues around shorter product life cycles, and given the fact that it's a very evolving industry, that remains one of the challenges. And then so on and so forth. You see examples around even in telecom and media, there are issues around onboarding, installation. Travel and hospitality has challenges again around seasonal staffing and language barriers. So net that shows us that there is this need for addressing specific challenges for enterprises, or for enterprises given the sector that they belong to, and that also sort of leads to the need for having industry specific solutions which can cater to these specific needs, which often are problems for specific enterprises depending on the industries that they belong to. Next slide. Now here, this slide is pretty obvious in terms of that we do see that there's a lot of acquisitions happening in the CXM industry, given that it's one of the most mature BPO industries out there. It was obvious that there was going to be acquisition, and this acquisition in the last 1 year has really heated up. We saw the two biggest acquisitions actually taking place in the first half of this year. And a lot of service providers are other service providers are also sort of taking note of that and doing acquisitions of their own, primarily driven through, it could either be through portfolio expansion, or sometimes it could be through access to new markets. And other times, some of the other providers are looking at it from a different perspective altogether, where they're looking at putting their bets on digital, in fact, and getting, improving or enhancing their digital capabilities to counter the acquisitions that are done by the bigger players. So sort of double clicking on the two major acquisitions that we saw, which is Teleperformance acquiring Majorel and Concentrix acquiring Webhelp. What that has done is created this so-called term that we've coined ourselves of CX Titans. So these two join the likes of Foundever as well. So Teleperformance, Foundever, and Concentrix are what we see in our eyes as the three biggest players by far in terms of the scale and the number of clients and FTs, as you can see on the screen. What that does have an implication on the broader CXM landscape is we see three things panning out. One is the vendor portfolio consolidation. Certainly, a lot of vendors a lot of enterprises are looking to consolidate their vendor portfolio, and given that these sort of providers are out there in the market, which can potentially one of just these providers can solve all their needs across different geographies. That's a trend that we are seeing, where enterprises are looking that, we're considering that they can actually trim down on vendor management costs and work with lesser vendors. Digitalization, as I said, has also increased because a lot of other service providers are looking at digitalization as the only way to differentiate themselves, because they cannot compete on scale with some of these larger players. So they're looking at digitalization to actually balance the favor in balance the scale in their favor. And it also leaves an opportunity for specialized players, because a lot of oftentimes what happens is enterprises say that given as bigger the provider becomes, it becomes difficult for them to provide personalized services and having the right sort of account management capabilities as well, and giving the right attention. So that leaves the window for specialized players to provide that sort of specialized or personalized attention to especially to small and mid-sized companies, which might not be the biggest clients for some of these larger players.
And Anubhav, I know we want to move on, but I just quickly wanted to make a couple of points on this slide. One is, when we talk about vendor portfolio consolidation, there is definitely a desire from enterprise buyers to work with fewer providers. And one of the things that we're seeing, though, is that also there is a view from the buyers, which is sometimes these mergers and acquisitions that have happened have meant that they've been consolidated without them designing it. So there is definitely a focus from buyers in terms of how do you balance your portfolio, and that's not necessarily consolidating into the biggest providers, which is the other point I just wanted to make, which is our advice to the buyers out there is always, biggest isn't always best. Sometimes it is, depending on your requirements. And if they meet your requirements, then great. But also, we always encourage that actually there's a very broad CXM market. And our advice is always look at what your requirements are, be very clear about what your business requirements are, and then look at the service providers based on what they can deliver, and are they delivering to your vertical and in your region, and have they got the right skills? But also then, how do they align to your cultural fit and your aspirations as a company to find the right one? So what I don't want to give you the impression is that the big ones are the best. The big ones are great, but there are a number of other players out there who are also equally as great in terms of delivering service, and you'll see that from our PEAK Matrix assessment. So just didn't want to make it feel like it's a bit focused on scale. Scale is one factor, but there are a lot of other factors that you would take into consideration when picking the right provider. So
Yeah.
if we keep moving on, Annabelle, I think we've got a lot of great content to still get through. So just wanted to do a quick poll for people, really, just to sort of, what do you expect to happen in the market? So 3 options, really. Do you expect to see more consolidation in the CXM market? You don't believe there's any more consolidation that's going to happen, or you're unsure? My personal opinion actually is that I think we will see a few more mergers and acquisitions, but not necessarily on the scale that we've seen this year. And you start thinking about where that's going to come from. And I'm not a betting man, but my view would be it will be a lot of focus from providers buying additional capabilities around digital services and technology, but not necessarily just buying bigger footprints. Because as we will focus on the impact of generative AI and digital solutions in general, then actually footprint may be something that actually becomes less important, as we also touch on things like translation solutions. So thank you very much for those that have responded. It's a good response rate, really. Interestingly, 85% of people believe there is to be more consolidation in the CXM market coming. For only 7% don't believe there'll be any, and 8%, like me, really, is unsure where that potential consolidation is going to come from. I say my money will probably be more on the digital services and technology being bought by large service providers versus it being 2 large service providers coming together. But I'm probably going to be proved wrong tomorrow, and there'll be a major acquisition announced as we finish this call. But thank you for sharing that. So I think we'll move on. So if we could move on to the next slide, and I think we can get into a bit more detail about some of the other areas that we've touched on today. But before we do that, I wanted to just also make an offer to this audience. And so if you're interested in having a deeper dive, and I think there's been a lot of questions have been asked through this session. So if you would like to have a deeper dive with any of our team and have a 30-minute conversation on a topic that you may be interested in, and it could be our PEAK Matrix assessments, we talk about market trends, shoring allocation trends, or the impact of generative AI, then we're offering, as part of this webinar, a 30-minute session complimentary to anybody. And in the chat, there'll be a link to register for that. So if you would like a deeper dive with the team in terms of any of those topics that you can see on the screen, or pretty much anything which relates to CXM, we'd happily do that. So please click on the link and we'll follow up after this call to have that conversation. So let us know if you're interested in that. And now let's move on. I think, Divya, you're probably going to take us through a bit more detail in terms of digital CXM.
Yeah, I think now we'll be going ahead understanding how we categorize the market into traditional and digital aspect, how generative AI is further impacting the market, and besides generative AI, what are the other digital investments that we are being made by the providers and increasingly being demanded by the enterprises. Sure. Now, having a look at the market, you see that over the last few years, digital CXM has grown significantly. If we talk about from the CAGR perspective, around 17 to 19% growth has been witnessed over the last 5 years. Right? How do we categorize digital CXM versus traditional CXM is? When we talk about traditional CXM, we talk about basic tools and technologies in order to handle simple queries. We don't directly mean that it does not include digital channels. Even when digital channels such as chat are included, they are included in a very siloed manner. But when we move to digital CXM, It's an intertwining of both human agents as well as technologies such as analytics, automation, conversational AI, as well as CX consulting to deliver a personalized experience. So over the last years, what we have seen is while the overall market has been growing at a rate of 7 to 9%, the share of digital CXM has been significantly increasing. Multiple factors contribute to it. Cost pressures which organizations are facing, and in order to that, they're moving to digital solutions as well as self-serve channels. The buzz of generative AI and how it's impacting the market, as well as increasing demand of personalization being asked by end consumers. Even when you go ahead and deep dive into digital CXM components, we look at analytics at something which is being most widely adopted. Even when you talk about from the cost pressure perspective, what we have seen is recently, while analytics is still being having witnessed a very strong growth in the number of client adoption, the deal sizes with analytics have taken a hit, and the deal sizes have reduced a bit. Automation, a very strong demand for self-serve solution. The technology adoption has been increasing, and consumers are also becoming tech savvy, which is further increasing the demand for automation and self-serve channel. Conversational AI with the generative AI coming in has further intensified with organizations with these tools now being able to provide very personalized experience, significant investment in agent assist tools, as well as consumer analytics being taken care of in these solutions. They have seen very high adoption over the last year. CX consulting services, these are the services which are becoming a step in the door kind of services for service providers to engage with their enterprise client. Any kind of large transformation deal, so large organizations preferably want to start with the CX consulting service, have an understanding of how the overall transformation will look like, and then go ahead with the implementation. Taking it further, one of the biggest things that we are seeing within the generative AI space or in the digital CXM space is the generative AI. What we try to do is we try to evaluate how different service lines are getting impacted due to generative AI. We assess different service areas on the potential and ease of adoption for generative AI. So CXM turned out to be the front runner. Multiple factors contribute to it. The kind of data abundance that CXM has. Within CXM, we collect a lot of data in terms of surveys as well as feedback that we get for customers. Generative AI can track these data as to give valuable insights in order to offer a more personalized experience to the end customers. Even when you talk from the content creation perspective, in order to engage customers as well as offer localized support, generative AI can help further in that. Personalization is another area where generative AI can help and offer better services. So these are certain things that actually make CXM one of the front runner. Even from regulatory, data sensitivity and criticality perspective, there are certain industries within CXM where the ease of adoption for generative AI has been really better. And all these factors take into account and make CXM the front runner of the generative AI services. We'll take it ahead and want to analyze how the market overall has shaped with generative AI. Now, looking at the overall market till 2023, if you witness, a very significant proportion is dominated by the traditional CXM market, and the market size is around 115 billion. We try to analyze how generative AI will impact this market. Overall, when we see from over the last couple of years, over the next 3 years, we are seeing the market to shrink. And this is one of the questions that we also received from you is how do you see that the market is going to shape up over the next couple of years? The market is expected to shrink with certain factors contributing to it. A lot of productivity gains to come and will decrease the revenue size. Certain of them, few of them which I'll highlight can be around with generative AI, there's a very strong potential to move from voice to non-voice channels. Again, when we talk about from the automation perspective, generative AI can further push the self-serve solution, make them better, reducing the agent touch. Other thing is around agent assist tools. Generative AI is coming up with a lot of solutions on the agent assist front with call summarization, next best action recommendation, increasing the productivity of agents. These three factors, and another thing which we very strongly wanted to mention here is while we are seeing that the overall market size in terms of revenue will shrink, with service providers making significant strides in terms of moving towards outcome and hybrid based constructs, we are also seeing that the margins as well as the profitability within digital CXM engagement will increase if the right ratios and right pricing models are switched. There are few
Divya,
other.
so Divya, just one other thing to call out here is that this is purely the outsource spend, and as you saw, this is only about a third of the total CXM spend. So there is also a very large market for service providers in the audience in terms of how do you move that in-house spend to outsource spend as well by offering competitive solutions. So that's just also a factor to think into here. So to net out some of that decrease on the overall market, it may be to also win more business from the in-house models.
Sure, David. Thanks for that. Moving ahead, we also, while we talk about how generative AI is going to impact the market and we did a market sizing, there are certain other factors that we need to consider while taking into account how generative AI will reshape the whole market. First will be the cost. While there's a lot of push for organizations to implement generative AI, they're also weighing the benefits of doing those solutions and taking those non-voice channels on their onshore locations versus the kind of arbitrage if they're leveraging those still the agent services from offshore locations. Enterprise and adoption of generative AI. What we are increasingly witnessing is right now, while there's a lot of organizations buzz to adopt generative AI, the generative AI implementation across regulated industries such as BFSI healthcare have been more on their internal facing processes. With time moving, we are expecting, and with time moving and a lot of technology maturity coming in, as well as data and regulation processes being further taken care of, we are expecting the adoption of generative AI will increase and the rate at which the cannibalization might happen will further increase. Another thing is around the outsourcing propensity. With generative AI, there can be multiple scenarios where we see a lot of simpler queries which can be handled by organizations by in-house through self-serve solutions, vis-a-vis which can actually affect the outsourced market overall. There can be another scenario where we see that all the number of queries and the kind of service providers are building up solutions and licensing those solutions in order to provide those simpler queries, and which can further increase the outsourcing propensity. So the change in outsourcing propensity is another factor which will significantly define the demand for outsourced market over the next coming years. We took a step further in order to assess the impact of generative AI and how it is impacting different industries and where does the highest impact or opportunities lies. We took it across two multiple levels, one being what is the kind of market size across each of the segments in the terms of digital penetration across each of the segments, and how do we see each of these segments, digital penetration within each of the segments growing because of generative AI. The top 5 industries where we'll see the highest disruption because of digital CXM and generative AI will be BFSI, telecom, media, technology, retail, and travel and hospitality. Within BFSI, there are a lot of simpler queries around credit approval, account management, which can be simply taken care of by generative AI. Telecom and media as a sector has always relied on low-cost labor in order to handle simpler queries. And with generative AI potential to automate these queries, there will be a significant impact here. Technology as a sector, when you talk about bigger technology players, majority of their generative AI investments or the kind of digital CX tools, they prefer to rely over in-house. But besides that, when you talk about smaller firms, they still outsource a lot of their tech services, and this as a sector will witness a lot of investments because any kind of new product releases can be easily taken care of with generative AI due to documentation and all those services being taken care of. retail as a sector, there's a lot of upsell and cross-sell opportunities that generative AI can provide through an analysis of trends. Travel and hospitality as a sector, global support through multilingual languages, as well as creation of itineraries can be something that can be done and offers a significant potential for generative AI to transform the space. Just quickly checking. I can't see the screen right now.
Yeah, I think we seem to have lost the slides, so I don't know if the Zoom admin could re-bring up the slides, please. So Divya, I know you probably know the slides off by heart, so why don't you just talk a little bit about what we would normally be talking about, and then hopefully the Zoom team can bring the slides back up quickly.
Sure. We also wanted to go ahead and talk about generative AI is definitely the talk of the market over the last few years. But besides that, significant investments are also being made in other solutions, such as language translation, metaverse. I think it was all the buzz this year, but we're still seeing a lot of scope here from the retail perspective as well as the travel and hospitality perspective, as well as workforce management solutions. Real-time language translation as well as accent neutralization are the two spaces which are picking up. Multiple service providers have invested here. Teleperformance has recently acquired Language Line to enhance its translation and interpretation services. Within Metaverse as well, one of the investment if I talk about will be Alorica Lives, which have their own Metaverse Innovation Center to expand their immersive learning and digital recruitment services. One thing I wanted to mention here is retail, travel, and hospitality are two sectors which are very high on metaverse. But besides that, even when you talk about regulated sectors such as BFSI, healthcare, they're significantly adopting metaverse at least for the employee engagement experience, and that is the first space that they're entering from the metaverse perspective. Workforce management solutions, right from hiring the agent to forecasting demand, scheduling, tracking, and improving agent experience. All investments are being made across all these spaces. And this is also helping enhance the customer experience through reduction of wait times and simply handling customer simply staffing the customer inquiries rightly. One of the provider who has made a lot of investments here can be VXI. VXI is currently offering workforce management as a service solution. One of the questions that we received is, are we seeing globally majority of the organizations being investing in generative AI? Yeah, this is a trend that we are seeing globally with almost all the sectors investing into it. But one of the things I'll point out is like certain global organizations from the BFSI sector, right, or the regulated sectors, their investments with generative AI are still internal. Like Morgan Stanley has developed an internal facing chatbot that searches the wealth management content repository. And while we talk about sectors such as retail, they are more open to testing the generative AI directly with the customer. Sephora is leveraging generative AI to offer personalized beauty recommendations to customers. Sure. Thank you. I think these are the three major solutions that we covered right now.
I think we can probably go back and because there's another poll question in one of the previous slides.
Yeah, David, over to you.
Yep. So thank you. And I think I've had a few little glitches with the slides, but hopefully we've caught up. So yeah, just the last poll question that we wanted to ask you, which is, so we've talked a little bit around language translation or AI-powered language translation and accent neutralization solutions. Be interested to get the view from the audience of those who have the need for translation and accent neutralization. Do you plan to invest in these solutions over the next 12 to 18 months? And so there's a simple answer of yes or no, or considering it. So if we could launch the poll, please, it'd be great just to get your view as to how you're doing. And if you're a service provider, it'd be interesting to just get your perspective on, are you offering these solutions? And you can sort of maybe say yes, or if you're considering developing those solutions, you can say considering. So it'd be good to get a view. So I don't know if the Zoom admin can launch the poll. It looks like maybe not. So, okay. So if people are able to chat, then why don't you just put in the chat if you've got a strong view on this? It'd be good to get your view on that. So please feel free to put in the chat whether you are considering it or not. Oh, we've got it. So that's great. So if we could do the poll, please, it'd be great to get some views as to if you're looking at these type of language translation solutions or accent neutralization. So it looks like we've got pretty healthy responses. So thank you very much. And it looks like we're pretty much half and half in terms of yes and considering, with then the remainder being in the no. So only about 13% as of now. So I think we can close the poll just to make sure we catch up on time. So 13% aren't considering those. And it'd be interesting at a later date to deep dive as to, is that because you already got them or you don't see the need because of the business that you're in? And then those are all considering them. Obviously, from an Everest Group perspective, we'd love to help you consider that as well, as you start thinking about your options. So thank you very much. So if we move back to the slides, if we get back into slides, we've only got a few more to finish off, and then we can take any questions that are left. So I think back to you, Divya.
Thanks, David. We wanted to talk about certain key takeaways, both for our service provider as well as the enterprise audience. When you talk about the current pressures and the kind of demand the CXM market is facing, the growth outlook is expected to be modest. But one thing we are seeing that the digital CXM market is still expected to grow at a very significant pace, and that is where we expect service providers to make those investments in order to capture that market. Sectors that will be driving the market growth are expected to be travel and hospitality and healthcare. We have seen a lot of interest from service providers as well in order to understand the healthcare market, and for those providers who were initially not in this market to enter here. One of the key suggestions that we have seen is for service provider trying to enter the healthcare market, probably focusing on those services initially where a lot of not a domain knowledge is required, probably such as member engagement, is kind of entry in order to expand into this attractive segment. The Middle East, Africa, and LATAM regions, which were initially looked at more from delivery perspective, have witnessed significant growth and are now looked at from a source geography perspective as well. Middle East and Africa has grown around over 20% over the last year. With consolidation happening in the market, one trend that we are seeing and one thing that service providers need to emphasize on is their account management capabilities. With very big titans emerging in the market, what enterprises are missing out on and increasingly asking for is specifically account management services and the personalized support. So having those service managers and CDs and making sure that they're been given that personalized support by small providers can help them come and get that enterprise audience. For enterprise perspective, when you talk from the consolidation, we are seeing a very strong trend of consolidation within COVID because of increased demand. A lot of enterprises expanded their portfolio, but now they are going back to the initial mechanism where they have those service providers, have those taking care of the initial control ratios and looking at their portfolio from the angle where they have a limited number of providers, making sure providing all the capabilities when you talk about from the location mix, technology, as well as geography presence, and working with those limited number of providers only. Another thing for enterprises, we want to highlight is it's time to embrace the generative AI. Sitting on the sidelines while not help. One of the things that we are seeing is a very big example is that enterprises are increasingly more likely to adopt the generative AI in their internal facing tools and further taking care of the compliance and data privacy measure to expand to the customer facing routes. For the enterprise audience, we recently did a survey and took a lot of results, and we saw that there's a very high potential for there's a very high likelihood for enterprises in order to take a hybrid or collaborative approach when implementing their generative AI solutions. We surveyed over 200 enterprises, and we saw that most of them don't want to completely outsource their generative AI solutions or generative AI applications within their CXM. Neither do they want to do it in-house. They have a preference to partner with tech heritage providers in order to have those hybrid implementations. These are certain key takeaways we want you to have in order to further assess what are the kind of growth drivers, for your CXM services. Moving ahead, and Anu, I'll pass it over to you.
Yep. Thanks, Divya. So I know we don't have a lot of time left, so we'll just quickly cover on this next slide. As David mentioned earlier, that we launched this global CXM peak specifically with the intention of covering the global service providers, and by global service providers we essentially mean the ability to serve different languages across different geographies. So the three geographies that we usually consider are Americas, EMEA, and APAC. So the ability to serve all these languages, all the different languages for these different geographies at scale was one of the key parameters that we had used. And also just worth reiterating again that the way to look at the speak matrix is not looking at it like, okay, the leaders are the best and the major contenders are then followed by the leaders and then the aspirants. As David mentioned, it's important to sort of look at the speak matrix as only a starting point, and then look at each service provider and the nuances, the different strengths and strengths that they bring to the table. Because what is important is to understand that each service provider has a different unique value proposition that they bring to the market, and those could be best suited for the different enterprise needs that we see. So having said that, and we do envision we plan to do this again next year, where we'll be kind of again looking at different service providers which cater this or fulfill this capability of being able to serve different all the different geographies. And
Anubhav, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important as well for those who are new to Everest Group. We obviously have done the global one, first time we did it this year. We also, though, have our EMEA peak, which looks at those providers that are serving the EMEA customer base. And again, to be clear, it's not where the services are delivered from, but it's where the end customer of that service would be. So we have the EMEA one, we have the Americas one, and we have the APAC one. And then this one is focused on those providers that can service all of those languages in all of those regions at scale. So it doesn't mean that a provider who's not on this isn't a global provider, but they may not be so deep in APAC as an example, and therefore they would not be on this. But yeah, also would refer people to the regional peaks if they've got a specific interest in any particular region. And I think that's pretty much out of time now. So I think if we just just to close, really, I think that what we would say is that if we haven't got to any questions that we've had, I think we've only got one question in the Q&A that we've not been able to answer. We will follow up. If you do have any other questions that come to you when we finish this call, then please, you've got our contact details, they'll be made available in the deck. Please circle back. We're happy to follow up with questions or give you any deeper insights into what we've talked about today. But I'd like to thank everybody for your attendance today. And as I say, and if you've registered for the free offer, then we will be in touch to get that set up for you as well. But thanks again. It's been great chatting to you today. And if you've got any follow-up questions, please come back to us. And thank you, Anubhav, and thank you, Divya.
Yep, thanks, David, as well.
Thank you.